So a few things about Lesley. She's a well-being manager at Northwestern University, where she oversees the work, life, and wellness resource programming and staff. She also serves as the office's central point of contact for faculty, postdocs, and graduate students. Her past roles include work supporting and coaching students, faculty, and staff at Harvard University, University of Pennsylvania, and most recently the University of Chicago as a work-life consultant for the Harris School of Public Policy and as an assistant director for Faculty Relocation, dual career services. She's a member of the College and University Work-Life Family Association Board of Directors. Lesley received her BA in Classics in English from Yale University and her MA in Classics from Bryn Mawr College. And without further ado, thank you so much, Lesley. I'm going to turn things over to you.
Thank you so much, Karen. I am so happy to be here. I am just going to start sharing my slides. So let's go from the beginning. And there we go. We're all still getting used to the reality of Zoom. Also, as you can see from my background, an academic background can lead you to all sorts of careers that you may not have expected while you were doing your degree. So, all right, well, if you were here, you are probably already inclined to believe that well-being is part of scholarship. And you probably agree that work-life integration is pretty key to your overall well-being. And you'll notice, of course, that we've all been talking about work-life integration rather than work-life balance. And that's because in my field, we've long since abandoned balance as something that is impossible to achieve, right? You can't get that evenness between work and life. And rather what we want instead is to be able to acknowledge and value and integrate the professional, the personal, and the academic, right? In a way that is right for you, in a way that actually serves your well-being. Okay, and well-being, again, is one of those things that's become very trendy. It is all in the zeitgeist the last couple of years, but what does it really mean? So the first thing I wanted to do is really just invite you to use the chat to tell me a little bit about what comes to mind when you think of well-being. How do you define it? All right, I see being healthy. Yeah, that's one of the things that often first appears for people. Not feeling tired. Yeah. Being calm and engaged, being motivated. Yeah. There is a sense of ease. There is a sense of balance, right? However we define that. And it is encompassing, as you can see Jen is pointing out, the physical and the mental, right? And it does not just include work. So I invite you to keep putting things there while we talk. But I'm just going to say that if you see that we've gotten a variety of answers, that's because there is no real one definition of well-being. In fact, the CDC even notes that there's no general consensus on what well-being means. There is a general agreement that it's about, at minimum, feeling positive about your life and feeling like you're thriving in all the aspects of your life. But beyond that, it's a very individual thing. So that makes it difficult to be able to talk about what's going to work for everybody, because not everything is going to work for everybody. The other thing about well-being is it's not something that you achieve or that you get, right? It is an ongoing, evolving process that you participate in throughout your life and that responds to the changes that occur throughout your life. So that again means that there's a lot of freedom in there, but it also can be very difficult to try to whittle down. So that being said, at Northwestern, we as a campus have decided to adopt our health promotion and wellness offices idea of well-being as consisting of these 8 interconnected dimensions of wellness. And so some of those are the ones that probably first come to mind, right? Physical, emotional, social, but some of these you may not have actually considered as being integral to your overall well-being beforehand. So intellectual well-being is really about recognizing your creative and analytical abilities and being able to exercise them, as well as to expand your skills and knowledge. Environmental is about being in an environment that is pleasing, that is stimulating, that is safe. And spiritual is less about ascribing to any one particular religious tradition and more about finding meaning and purpose in your life. Vocational is about being satisfied with what you are doing for work, whether that's professional or academic. And financial is not just about, are you satisfied with your financial state now, but are you optimistic about your financial state in the future? So you can probably already see, right, if you are not experiencing well-being in one of these areas, it is going to have an effect on everything else, and it is very difficult to tease out. And in this moment particularly that we're going through, there are a lot of areas that are being hit all at once and simultaneously having ramifications on the rest, right? So you may not feel safe going into your lab these days and may not feel like you have that safe well-being environment. You may not feel like you have the energy or even the tools to expand your skills and knowledge at this moment, right? You might have a partner who lost a job and that's having a huge impact on your financial well-being, right? Or you may be still thinking about all of these events that are personal and professional that you were counting on that were coming up and that got canceled. All of that has an impact on your overall well-being, and inevitably that has an impact on your scholarship, on the amount and quality that you can produce. So we are, as you know, living in an especially stressful period. And those stressors are overlaying the high levels of stress that women in STEM were already under. Chief among these stressors is the uncertainty of what's happening. Where are we going? What's going on? That lack of control and feeling of powerlessness over current events, local, national, global, what's going on in our institution, or what is happening even to those who we love, right? And that is accompanied, especially for people of color, by fear too, right? With all of the things that have been going on vis-a-vis police brutality and a lot of incidents of racism across the country. Information is bombarding us from the media, but also from our own institutions and everywhere, all the time. Tech, of course, doesn't make that easy because it's designed to keep us wanting to get more and more information. And you may be experiencing a situation where the expectations from your PI or your supervisor haven't really changed, or actually maybe seem to have gotten worse, despite everything that's going on. The next steps that you may have been planning on for graduation or for the next job opportunity, those may be harder to think about or to wonder how you're going to make those next steps. And again, as I said, there's been a lot of disappointments and cancellations, from happy family events, vacations, to conferences, places where you were going to be able to thrive professionally and make connections. So the isolation, the disappointment, the grief is really real. And that does mean that there is a huge impact on our productivity. Many of us have seen it go down over the last 7 months. And if you have dependents whom you are caring for at home, then it has become even worse. So it is no surprise, right? Just about every media outlet, journals from Nature to the Lancet to Science to, as you can see here, inside higher ed, Scientific American, even Harvard Business School are noting that the pandemic is having an intense and negative impact on women in STEM, and particularly on women of color. So it definitely feels like we're undergoing this watershed moment. And yet the truth, right, is that so much of this was already happening. It's just that now it is magnified and it is exacerbated. So that is shining light on all of this, but also magnifying the stress. There are some who would say that a life of research is a life where stress is inherent. That is just part and parcel of the deal. And that's not entirely wrong, right? We are often drawn to this field because being a scholar and having the challenge, having that adrenaline, the focus, is part of what makes it exciting and challenging and motivating, right? We do need some stress to be able to have that intense focus, to be able to push beyond what we even knew what we could do. And so that it's not about achieving a state where we are not experiencing stress. It is about understanding the difference between what is healthy stress and what is unhealthy stress, or as you can see here, what is typically called eustress or distress, right? And when we're performing under healthy stress, okay, yeah, a lot is going on, it might feel very intense, but we generally still feel in control of what's happening in our lives, academically, professionally, personally. And that comes from being grounded physically, emotionally, mentally. If the stressors that we are experiencing continue and they increase and we don't have any relief, that is when we start to tip over into that yellow imbalance zone. And that is where you start to see that manifest in physical symptoms like headaches, insomnia, aches and pains, acid reflux, right? But mental symptoms as well, right? Fogginess, distraction, memory loss, right? Irritability. And if that continues, then we start to head down into that breakdown zone. Our symptoms worsen, they start to become omnipresent, and they start to interfere significantly with all the different aspects of our life. And so here is where you also start to see anxiety, depression, lack of motivation start to rear up. A lot of those physical symptoms getting a lot worse, right? And that has, again, a profound impact on your ability to focus, to concentrate, and to be able to do the kind of work that requires a lot of mental attention and creativity. At its very worst, if this happens, this is where we start to see people experiencing active thoughts of self-harm or even suicide. The truth, unfortunately, is that it is very difficult to determine the line between healthy and unhealthy stress. Oftentimes, when we start to see it, it's when we are starting to really dip into that red zone. Part of that is because American culture in general is a culture that values overwork. We are always emphasizing constant productivity. We reward busyness. We reward even the performance of busyness rather than even just busyness itself, right? When you ask someone how they are, how do they respond? Oftentimes it's some variation of busy, so busy, or stressed, so stressed, to the point where we start to normalize that response as just being typical of what our everyday lives consist of. And we start to normalize things like, I didn't get enough sleep last night. I skipped lunch yesterday. I haven't talked to my friends or left the lab in weeks. And this becomes something that seems normal, which then again makes it difficult to recognize the symptoms of being crossing over from the healthy stress to the distress. Technology, again, just magnifies that by making it even more possible for us to push through our symptoms, physical and mental, and then decide that we are just going to continue to work and do that 24/7. You can see right away that much of what makes a stressor propel us into that distress, is it continuing to last? Is it intense? And does it continue to get intense? Is it predictable or not? And do we have any control over it, right? The fact that as humans, we have a very high intolerance for uncertainty for very long periods of time, right? All of this is in effect right now. And it previously, we might be able to depend on mental models, ways that we have coped with different forms of distress in the past. But now we are in a situation where there is so much going on that we've never encountered before that we don't even have those to fall back on. And then there's the culture of academia. So the vocational aspect of being a scholar, right? A researcher, being a researcher is a calling. It's not just a job. And if it is a calling, then it is something that not only should we do for 24/7, we should be excited about doing it 24/7, right? So implicitly or explicitly, there becomes this message that if you are not totally focused on your work, if the work is not the priority, if you are not spending most of your time on it, then you're not committed. Maybe you're not doing it right. You're not capable, or you're not doing enough. And within that context, doing anything that brings your focus away from work, even if it's sleep or exercise or taking care of your kids, that can be a profound source of guilt and stress. For those who are not working 24/7, who are engaging in different forms of self-care and well-being, they may not be talking about it because as a culture, we don't validate talking about that. We validate the talking about the stress and the busyness and the other symptoms, right? And so oftentimes you don't hear that side of things. Or what people will say is something very non-committal, like, yeah, I know there's just so much to do, and not share their personal experience. Because in general, we don't tend to talk about this in a nuanced fashion. So what you're mostly seeing is what you see here, right? It is an either or. Either I'm going to eat, sleep, get more exercise, see friends, do all of the things that might pertain to your well-being, or I'm going to, if you're a graduate student, graduate. Or if you're a postdoc, I'm going to get to the next job. Or if you go on into academia, I'm going to get tenure, I'm going to get promotion, and on and on. But it is always presented as an or and not an and. So we don't see the successful integration of it unless we are lucky to have some models who are actually modeling that for us. If only that were all of it, right? But of course, we also have sexism, racism, homophobia, xenophobia. The populations who are most likely to be struggling with depression and anxiety are also populations that are most likely to be marginalized in both higher education and society. And dealing with that constant stress of discrimination, harassment, microaggressions within all of this is not something that we can discount. So it is important to remember, we are all in the same storm right now, but we are not in the same boat. Given all of that, it's no wonder that there's a growing body of literature about the prevalence of mental health problems in academia, all the way from graduate student to tenured professor on the verge of retirement. And again, we don't necessarily talk about this, and we may not talk to our PIs or our supervisors if we're struggling, even if, and perhaps especially if, our struggles are impacting our performance. So all that's to say that 2020 has shined a light on so many of the things that cause work-life conflict and harm to our overall well-being, and shown that these are really systemic issues. They're not individual ones. And fixing those systemic issues is essential. It's going to require change at the federal, state, and local and institutional levels. It's going to require all of us, right, advocating for that change, particularly those of us with privilege. But individual efforts matter too. And while we're engaged in that long-term work of culture change, it is important that we turn to individual efforts and what we control, because that's what's going to bring us some measure of relief right now. So since, again, it's really important that you address your specific well-being across those 8 interconnected dimensions, I'm not going to give you like a listicle that says 10 top ways to get work-life integration or to achieve well-being, because it has to be particular to you. And that's going to start with figuring out where your particular needs are. And that's why we're going to do a little exercise called the Wheel of Life. So if you don't have a piece of paper or something or a pen, go and get one. Wait, this is an exercise that is often used by career coaches. I like it because it hits on a number of areas that directly relate to those 8 well-being dimensions, right? So here you see physical health, career, financial, family and friends, fun, recreation, and personal growth. So it's not breaking them all up entirely, but it encompasses all of them in different forms and fashions. So what you're going to do is copy this, right? And assess how satisfied you are in each of these by putting a dot on the line that represents it. So 10 is, I am completely satisfied. Everything is excellent. 1 is the opposite. Once you've put those dots, then you're going to connect them in a line. Don't overanalyze this, don't overthink it, just go with your immediate impulse. And I'm going to give you about 2 minutes or so. All right, maybe start taking another couple of seconds just to finish up. And what we're going to do is we're going to go into breakout rooms, and I'm going to show you the questions that I'd like you to explore within your breakouts. So you're going to have about 5 or 6 minutes, and I'd like you to talk with each other about what was the experience of the exercise like? What was surprising? What was challenging? What was affirming? Don't feel like you have to share anything that's overtly personal, right? You don't need to talk about specific details unless you want to. But hopefully this will be a chance for you guys to get to connect a little bit and to share a little bit about the experience. All right, so I see someone shared, yeah, there were some areas that were clearly better than others, but yeah, the connecting the dots made you realize the big gap difference. And that ideally is what it should have done, is sort of draw attention to some areas that you may not have realized had required as much attention as they might have. Yeah. Yeah, and this exercise, people respond to it in different ways, but again, it is a good way to at least start getting a baseline of what is going on with you, because that's really where we need to start. But also, it is the kind of thing that often we just don't have time for, right? Or we feel like we don't have time for it. For a lot of people, right, this might be a moment too, as I see Colleen mentions, where you're feeling like there is some control that you can exercise over career and work, and that is great. Any place, particularly in this epic, area of uncertainty that we're living under, that can give you that feeling of agency and control, is good psychologically and helps motivate you in other areas too. So I'm really glad to see that, and that may have been something that the exercise brought home to you as well. Okay, so we could talk a lot. We could spend the whole hour talking about that exercise, but obviously we don't have all of that time. So now that you have a sense of where you are in your own lives, let us ratchet it back a little bit and talk about some of the things that are going to be true for all of you across the board. And that is just those basics that you already know, right? Eating well, some form of movement, and sleep. Without that foundation in place, there's no way to sustainably thrive as a scholar. And you know this, right? I'm not telling you anything new. So then the question becomes not, do you not know that this is important? It becomes, what's holding you back from paying attention to those three areas? Because those three are often the very first things to go out of the window when we encounter a stressor. Of those basics, sleep might be the most important. Sleep hygiene is a big term these days. If you saw the new Army Physical Fitness Training Manual, actually came out saying that strategic napping, because of its effect on performance, is now mandated, or at least strongly advised. And that is, again, because we have this growing body of literature pointing to the necessity of sleep and the negative impacts on our cognitive state, our physical state, public health risks when it comes to drowsy driving, that more and more researchers and doctors are taking into account. And that is particularly true, right, when we talk about the cognitive and psychological risks, because those definitely affect your work directly in terms of the decreased focus and concentration, the memory loss, the anxiety, the depression, and so on. Now, it is true that there is some variation in the number of hours that individuals need. But that being said, Berkeley professor and sleep expert Matthew Walker has noted that there are actually far fewer people out there who can truly exist on 5 to 6 or fewer hours of sleep a night. Vast majority of us do actually need 7 to 8 hours. And the way that you can figure out if that's true for you is to notice if you're able to go to sleep without any aids, and you can wake up naturally without any alarms or anything else and feel more or less rested. Something to keep in mind, and something that we'll come back to. Right? In addition to those breakouts, right, and those basics, one of the things that you should consider is building in a pause for mindfulness. So mindfulness, again, very, very trendy. Oftentimes may feel like a huge ask to say I have 30, 45 minutes to sit and meditate, but really all mindfulness is about stopping and being present. So even 1 minute can have a number of beneficial effects, because it is just about stopping right now, taking a breath, and then just calmly observing, where are you right now in your body, in your emotions, in your mind? What might you need? It is a chance to calm the fight or fight instinct and to allow yourself to respond intentionally instead of just reacting. And that is where the benefit is. When we are reacting, we sometimes get ourselves lost in a host of different reactive and unhelpful thoughts. So all or nothing thinking, right? So if my PI doesn't get this grant, I am going to lose my spot in the lab and everything is going to be horrible, right? that's catastrophizing and also all or nothing thinking. Sometimes we engage in mind reading. We assume that we know what other people are thinking, and that might not be the case. We might engage in fortune telling, right? This pandemic is never going to go away. We're never going to get back to anything that resembles the prior past again, and I'm never going to be able to travel on a plane, right? That's fortune telling. And it then becomes a lot easier to discount the positive and to overgeneralize about things. So you can see here, right? You have the thought, and it is born out of a lot of feelings that overwhelm you, such as panic and stress. And sometimes that leads to ways to instinctively react to it by trying to numb it or make it go away. And so that could be things like overwork. It could be skipping meals. It could be skimping on sleep, or a whole host of things, as opposed to giving yourself the opportunity to actually respond intentionally and being able to think about what you do have control over. Where can you have some agency? Where you're acknowledging that the feelings may still not be pleasant. You may still feel a lot of discomfort, but you can sit with that and be able to think what would actually help and not just numb the situation, and who can help. So something again to think about. Pausing is something that you can do to help you transition, say from you're going from Zoom meeting to Zoom meeting to Zoom meeting. Sometimes people like to build it in the beginning of the day, the end of the day. It's also a way to just step back if you're feeling a lot of resistance, saying to doing something like writing, right? Or getting started with running an experiment, just to take that pause. So something to build in that might be helpful across the board. Beyond that, self-care, like well-being, is very individual. Now, the whole notion of self-care has become something that has been easy to devalue, right? It has become so consumerist that it can even seem a little bit trivial. So there is a professor at the New School in New York, Natalia Melman-Pertzela, who wrote this wonderful article for the Chronicle of Higher Education called "When Wellness is a Dirty Word." And she notes that it's very easy to overlook or dismiss people who are gravitating towards things like yoga or meditation or healthy eating or so on, because you're ignoring why people choose to engage in practices like that. And especially ignoring the ways that women in particular are able to assert agency over their inner familial and physical lives in these manners, right? So by devaluing that lived experience in reality, you discount all of these things that actually allow people to be present and have agency over their bodies and minds and be able to thrive, right? So when you're trying to think about what will work for you, the key thing is to think again about what will help and how do you feel. If you feel numb and then you feel worse at the end, that's not a good sign. If you feel more energized, if you feel more rejuvenated, then that's a sign that that actually is something that is working for you and helping you achieve well-being, right? And that, again, it could depend. A Netflix binge might make someone feel energized and as if they relax. For someone else, it might make them just feel like they numbed themselves for a little bit and they're still stressed about the situation. So that is just something to keep in mind and not to judge yourself for, right? Again, the stereotype of self-care that comes to mind is often of a cisgendered white woman, middle class, right? Who's going to say the spa to get her nails done. And it is very easy to look at that and say, this is an example of self-indulgence or superficiality, right? But what if instead for that person, it's a rare moment of stillness, of being able to be present without other obligations, to not be someone's mother, to not be someone's partner, to not be someone's daughter, right? What if it is about being able to approach one's body in an attentive and nurturing manner, as opposed to a dismissive or even a punitive manner? How does that change how you view that form of self-care? So you're going to take about a minute, quickly jot down, what do you find rejuvenating? How do you feel when you're engaging in the forms of self-care that work for you? Just take about a minute. You're not going to share this with anyone. This is purely for you. All right, start to maybe finish whatever you're jotting. You can always come back to this later. So now what I want to do is give you a little space to address the types of questions that, again, in the busyness of life and in the overwhelming state that we're currently in, you may not have been able to make time for. It is true that COVID is shining a light for a lot of people on what they actually value, but it can be good to, again, just continue to create moments where you can sit down and answer these questions. What is most important to you? What is it that you love to do? Not just in your research, but throughout your life. And in the past, I would have asked you to say, what does life look like in 5 years? But this is a situation in which it is difficult to even think about what's happening in a month, right? And so instead, I want you to think about what an ideal day looks like next week in this context. Take again a couple minutes, maybe 2 to 3 minutes, just to think about those questions and write some of it down. Right, maybe take about another 30 seconds. All right, so in the interest of time, hold on to that and consider maybe sharing some of this in your breakout rooms workshop. And then think about how, now that you understand what's important to you, what your goals are, both short-term and long-term, that is what is going to allow you to think about how to allocate the very limited time that you have, the money that you have, the energy that you have more effectively. And that is especially true nowadays when it comes to energy and it comes to time, right? All of those are at a premium. And at least some of your hours do need to be dedicated again to those basics: sleeping, movement, eating well. So that's already taken up. And some of your other hours, you're not going to have control over, right? Because you have a meeting with your PI, you have scheduled time to be in the lab to work with the equipment, right? You are not going to be able to necessarily shift that. The hours that you can control, well, there it can be difficult to create and enforce boundaries, right? Especially because high accountability tasks that are low priority, like answering emails, often end up taking precedence over low accountability, high priority tasks like research, like writing, and like even maybe spending time with those you love. So it is very easy then to finally get to the point where you have to draw from other things, particularly your personal time, in order to meet the high priority, low accountability goals, because those things don't have immediate deadlines. They don't have that immediately, okay, I've crossed that off the list. Right? And if you're not dedicating time to what's important to you and you don't feel like you're making progress towards your most important goals, well, that again contributes to persistent anxiety and stress and guilt. You might even find yourself trying to double down and overwork, right? Well, honestly, what we know about the relationship between productivity and hours spent is this, right? That after about 48 hours a week, it starts dipping. After about 55 hours, it is sharply dipping. By the time you put in 70 or more, you might as well have not done anything. And here I am going to fully admit, this is not a study that included scientists, right? Let alone women scientists. Right? At the moment, I haven't been able to find something that is specifically addressing the issue of productivity and its relationship to quality and quantity of output within academic science. Right now, what I have are anecdotes that say you have to put in 70 plus hours, but there's no data behind that. And in fact, what we do see is that it just sets you up for more imbalance, more burnout, and actually lower quality work, right? So there are a number of ways to try to start approaching this. And again, a lot of it's going to depend on you, but I'm going to talk about 2 different ways that you might try out in the next couple of weeks. And the first one is going to come from the National Center for Faculty Development and Diversity, NCFDD. And this is an organization that was founded by faculty and former faculty, is run by faculty and former faculty. Its whole goal is to help graduate students, again, through late stage scholars, be able to thrive, as you can see here in the academy, and be productive, but also have a life. And so they have this core curriculum, and they have a lot of online webinars, courses, fora. And if you are at an institution that has purchased an institutional membership like Northwestern, then you will have access to all of these. And I encourage you to go and check it out. At the core of most time management strategies, again, is getting a realistic sense of what you have to do, given what's important to you, when. In this Sunday meeting strategy is at the core of NCFDD's How to Align Your Time with Your Priorities course. It's a strategy that they note often inspires the most resistance, but also the one that folks have found most effective. And it's certainly for many of the academic clients that I've coached has been a real game changer. So this is how it works, right? You set aside 30 minutes every week, doesn't have to be Sunday. You spend the first 5 minutes actually writing down all of the schedules and the non-negotiable meetings, appointments in whatever calendar works for you. That should include, again, things like sleeping, eating, seeing friends, right? If you have kids, right, what you are going to need to do in terms of their schools nowadays, or their daycare, or their needs. So then you do that. 10 minutes, you then spend just brain dumping, like, here's everything else that needs to be done. And then the last 15 minutes, you start to take from that brain dump and put it in the calendar. And immediately what happens is you can't put all of it, right? So then you have to start making some choices. And this is a way to then be able to force you to set some boundaries and to actually think, do I need to do this? Can someone else do this? Is this a situation where I can say no? Does this need to be done now? Can it be put off till later? And some things, again, you're not going to be able to deal with, and other things you might be able to. The mere fact of being able to get all of the things that you have to do down on whatever paper or computer document you have alone can be psychologically really helpful. And this is meant to be flexible and adaptable, and it is about making things easier to recognize and give attention to. So that is one strategy that has worked for a lot of people to try. The other is to work in pulses. Right? Some people will talk about the Pomodoro Technique. Some people will talk about time chunking, right, on their calendars. It is about being able to carve out 20 to 15 minutes. And again, because we are in a pandemic and there is so much overwhelm, I would probably try to make that even shorter, right, 15 to 20, just to focus entirely on a task, putting away all distractions, closing all windows, putting away the phone, screens, what have you, right, so that you can really focus and get something done on one thing. And then you take a break for 5 to 15 minutes and you do something again, rejuvenating. And then you repeat. And then you assess that. So sometimes when you start trying to do this, it can be very difficult to get started. And this again is when building in a pause could help. Or for others, just getting a random sheet of paper and then doing a worry dump, which is just everything that comes to mind, such as, I hate writing this grant, I don't ever want to do this, why do I have to do this, to try to break through the resistance, right? And then go back. And the assessment, again, how did this work? Did this work? What was good about it? Do you want to keep any of it? That reviewing and assessing, that is really important. Because if you're not making progress, right, then it is a good moment to step back and again ask you, as we were talking about with sleep earlier, what is holding you back? What's getting in your way? And the NCFDB, again, likes to talk about the time management guru, Julie Morgenstern's breakdown, which is it a technical error because you're missing a skill, or you just haven't set something up right? Like your notes are everywhere, and by the time you find them, you've already lost some time, right? Or did you underestimate how much time it is actually going to take to write that proposal, right? Maybe it's a psychological obstacle. So it could be the anxiety of the moment, right? But it could also be perfectionism or imposter syndrome. Right? Or especially nowadays, it could be an external reality that is out of your control, your lack of childcare, the fact that you don't have a space to eat lunch in your building anymore, right? Your own health and how that might be affected. The point is, once you've identified what is getting in your way, then you can start to figure out how and if you can address it. And if you find yourself saying, I can't do this because for whatever reason, even if it's just that you are already listening to me and saying, like, I know this is not going to work for me. And you know what, you might be right, because there's no one right way of doing this. The goal is just to help you find some sustainable relief amidst all of this and to build from there, right? So that automatically takes trial and error. So viewing your own well-being as an experiment that you're engaged in, that you are going to analyze, that you are going to try, that you are then going to assess and adjust and go back. This is a way to turn that analytical gaze on yourself and also to challenge any assumptions that you might be making. So to go back to the sleep, right? If you know right now there's no way you can get 8 hours of sleep, okay, that might be true, but then I invite you to gently just challenge that. So there's no way you can get 8 hours. Is there no way that you could get any more than what you're getting now? Could you get 15 or 30 minutes more? How might that feel? What effect might that have? Could you break it down? To try again, to not make that an all or nothing. Either I get 8 hours or I just don't sleep. But to try to bring it down to something small that you can experiment with, and that might actually help. So when it comes to assumptions, I have seen that also matter when it comes, for example, to talking to colleagues or even to our PIs. So for example, how do you know, if you haven't had a conversation, if your PI's expectations are really the same as they were pre-pandemic? They might be, they also might not be, right? How do you know for sure, or do you know for sure, and based on what? That you will suffer personally or professionally if you take some time off. Again, that might be true, but it is worth just examining and making sure to see if you do have more space there than you thought you did. And obviously, given the precarity of the situation and particularly the financial context of our institutions, it can be really difficult to think that we should do anything outside of what we have been asked to do in the work world. But this is a moment, again, to sort of at least think about what can you do? What is holding you back? Who can help you? And that, of course, is going to change as you approach your work, as your strategies change, as the situation changes. But thinking about redefining productivity for this moment, right? Given what's most important for you. And thinking too about who can help you in all of this. Because this is where we go back from where the individual is to where the collective is. A lot of self-help books will only talk about what you can do in that individual moment. But there's no real progress that can be made in any area of our life without support. And just as it's important to have a variety of intellectual mentors to move forward in your research, it is also important to have a variety of people in your support network for all aspects of your well-being. And that includes not just people, right? That includes institutions, that includes resources. For example, at Northwestern, right, that might be that you take advantage of our free counseling through the Employee Assistance Program, or if you're a graduate student through CAPS. Or that you would take advantage of my office's well-being consultation so that we can do one-on-one coaching to help you figure out where you might go and what might make a difference for you in terms of available resources. Or new parent consultations with us too, to see if there is anything out there that can help you as you're trying to manage remote schooling or the lack of childcare throughout this time. So now I want to give you again a little time to answer these questions and think about who is in your network, who's going to help you stay on track, right? Who's going to support you? What will support you? So again, take just a couple minutes, and then I'm going to send you into breakout rooms to talk a little bit more about that. All right, maybe start thinking about wrapping up in the next 30 seconds or so. All right, so this is a moment where I would love for you guys to do some reflection in your breakouts with each other that you are wonderful organizers, Bernice and Casey and Karen, are going to put you in. And so as you talk a little bit about how you guys have been doing your own support networks and your own work-life integration strategies, think too again about what you see here, right? What small steps can you take to move forward in the next couple of weeks to experiment with? Is there a resource you can take advantage of? And who might you reach out for support? So
Thank you so much, everyone. We're just going to take the last 5 minutes or so for any questions that you may have. You can direct to Lesley.
Yeah, and before we start too, I just want to say, you know, and I neglected to mention that among your support networks, right, for a lot of us, a therapist is a key part of that. For me, it's certainly been the case with my own lifelong anxiety. And for other people, this has been a good moment to start teletherapy. So that is a good source of support if you haven't had a chance to investigate that too. It has made a big difference for many of us. Okay, now questions, if anybody.
Hi, I have a question.
Yeah.
So I'm in Korea, and sometimes here going to therapies is not very common, actually.
Yeah.
Is there any any way to do these things remotely? Like, for example, I mean, I'm a United States citizen, but I don't know when I'll come back to the United States, but I would want to have, I think it will be useful, especially for this family anxiety that I'm having. I would want to see a therapist, but I'm not very confident about going to therapists here in Korea. So if you know, there's a way to do things virtually.
Thank you for bringing it up, because I'm sure you're not the only person who's been wondering about that. And are you at Northwestern or?
No, I'm in Korea. I'm Institute of Basic Science. I was in Northwestern in 2018.
So let me do a little research, because I know more about the specific Northwestern resources and how they can apply, but let me do a little bit of digging, and I'll send it to the organizers so that they can share that information with the group. I'll also follow up with some additional resources for folks to follow up with too. You know, finding a therapist of color has been an issue for a lot of people, and there are some good sites that will help direct you to people who are trained in racialized trauma or who have backgrounds where they will have more understanding of what you're going through if you are in a marginalized population. And again, I say this as someone for whom that was really important for me, as well as being half Brazilian, to find someone who understood that cultural and ethnic component for anything. So it's worth thinking about what your needs are in terms of the therapy too, and asking for them.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I'm actually wondering that there might be, hopefully, thank you, Lesley, for searching for those resources. A few of my friends, I mean, they're not, or acquaintances, they're not too close, but they are mentioning that they were able to do virtual sessions with their therapist. So maybe that's something that you might be able to hopefully figure it out. And so even if physically or in Korea, hopefully having this trying to meet at a time where it's both good for you. Maybe some virtual session might be available too.
Yeah, thank you. So, one of the silver linings of all of this, right, is making technology something that allows us to connect in ways that we weren't able to before. Other questions or comments or anything that people would like to share?
This has been great. I'm delighted to meet this group of people. I had no idea it existed. As I told Julia in our last group, this sort of came through an email that I just said, sure, why not? Looked interesting. Everybody could use a little help here. And I'm really delighted that I joined. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
So Lesley, I do have a question. Do you see actually a more demand of people contacting your office during these times?
So the demand actually is starting really now. In the beginning, it was interesting. Everyone seemed to be really fueled by adrenaline and to be too overwhelmed to reach out. But in the last month or so, we've been getting more and more and more outreach and more requests for programming and connections to the different resources that we oversee. So, and that again is not surprising. If you felt like it is sort of hitting you really now in the last 2 months or so, that's a very common experience. Because again, the adrenaline was really propelling people forward. Then there was this thought that by fall, everything was going to be better. And now that we're here is when a lot of people are hitting the wall. So be gentle with yourself and understanding if you're feeling like now is actually so much tougher than it has been this whole time. Right, and I don't, oh yes, thank you. Yes, if you're at Northwestern, we do have a Teams channel for Wellbeing that my office and our wellness champions oversees. We try to put resources, events, advice, interactions every single day. And so, definitely feel free to send a request to join that. And then I don't want to keep you all because boundaries, as we've said, are important in being able to have your time. And I'm sure you all have been on Zoom meetings like way too many Zoom meetings today already. But I am just going to say again, right, this group is a source of support for you. And so again, we come back from the individual to the collective. And it's clear that this is a place where you can help each other, support each other, give each other accountability in reaching to your goals, and also think about how to advocate for the things that you all as women in STEM need. So I am just very grateful to have the opportunity to hear about your experiences and to help hopefully give you some space to start thinking, because again, it's not like we have solved what your work-life integration needs are in this hour, but hopefully we've given you a start to think about what your needs are and what you would like to start trying to get some of that sustainable relief in the next couple of weeks. So thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Lesley. It was great having you on. Bye, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lesley.